All right, welcome back everyone to the deep dive. Sometimes we get these questions that really make you kind of tilt your head and go, huh, I never thought about it that way. And today is definitely one of those days.
Oh, yeah. What do we have today?
Well, we're diving into this question of whether Buddhism is actually a religion or if it's maybe like something even deeper than that.
Interesting. I can already see how that's going to get some people thinking.
Right. And to get to the bottom of this, we're going to really zero in on this key concept called dependent origination. You might have also heard it called alter.
Yeah, that's a big one. I mean, when a lot of folks think about Buddhism, what comes to mind? Temples, monks, those robes, chanting.
Yeah, totally. All those rituals, that sense of community, all the stuff we kind of associate with religion,
Right.
right? But what we want to do today is kind of peel back those layers and really get to the core, the heart of what the Buddha actually taught. So, our mission today, if you will, is to see if Buddhism at its root is more like a really profound philosophy, like a way of understanding the reality we all live in.
And a way to find freedom from suffering, right? I mean, that's a huge part of it, too.
Absolutely, huge part of it. And it's interesting how even the way Buddhist ideas have been translated reflects this kind of philosophical, practical aspect. Like, instead of saying noble truths, you often hear four clear truths.
Well, that's a good point. It's subtle, but it kind of shifts the tone, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's less about dogma and more about understanding things clearly, seeing the truth. Okay, so let's jump right in. One of the biggest things that sets Buddhism apart from a lot of religions is that there isn't this central worshipped creator God.
Yeah, that's a major difference. You think about a lot of Western religions, right? You've got this self-existent, eternal, all-knowing, all-powerful being who created everything.
Right, and even in many Eastern ideas of gods, they're often seen as these beings who achieved their status through practices like, I don't know, following the Tao, or as expressions of a truth that existed before the universe. But generally, they share this idea of being immortal.
Right, right. Like they're kind of beyond the limits of birth and death that the rest of us deal with.
Yeah, exactly. But in Buddhism, the Buddha is not a deity in that way at all. He's seen as a guide, an awakened teacher. He went through his own struggles, his own search, and then through his own effort, he found the causes of suffering and how to become free from it.
Yeah, and the term Buddha itself, just means a way in one. It's not about being given awakening by some external force. It's about waking up to the truth yourself.
And it's a multifaceted awakening, right? There's waking up to yourself, helping others wake up, and then this idea of being awakened to all phenomena, to the true nature of reality.
Yeah, exactly. It's not just about like personal enlightenment. It's about seeing through all the illusions and understanding how everything really works.
Mm.
And it's not easy. Our sources talk about this self-awakening going beyond our typical six senses, like sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, and even thought.
Right, like it goes beyond what we normally experience to this deeper understanding, this unchanging true reality, what they call ni.
Yeah. And it's about breaking through all that's impermanent and kind of illusory to realize this pure nature within, the pishi that's supposed to be within every one of us.
So it's less about believing in a god and more about realizing this potential that's already there inside you.
Precisely. And that's why the emphasis is on personal practice, on direct experience. It's not enough to just have faith or believe something. You have to actually do the work. You have to go through the process yourself.
And the goal is to reach this supreme equal awakening, or Siluvuhar. It's kind of hard to translate, but it's like this ultimate clarity where you see everything perfectly clearly without any bias or distortion.
Yeah, it's like all illusions are gone and you have this complete and true understanding of reality.
Now, there's this really interesting statement attributed to the Buddha when he became enlightened. He said, strange, strange. Every being on this earth has the wisdom and virtue of a Buddha within, but tangled delusions block them from realizing it.
Wow, that's powerful. It's saying that everyone has this Buddha nature, this potential for awakening, but we get caught up in all these delusions.
Right. It's not that we're lacking anything, it's that we're kind of blinded by our own ignorance and all the troubles we create for ourselves.
And that brings us to another important point, which is that Buddhism sees a fundamental equality between all beings, even Buddhas. Buddhism does acknowledge the existence of gods, but they're not seen as these supreme, all-powerful beings. They're more like sentient beings who inhabit these higher realms with more blessings, and some pretty extraordinary abilities, what they call Om.
Yeah, like being able to move through space or see things at a distance, stuff like that.
Right, right. But even these gods, with all their blessings and special powers, they're still bound by the cycle of birth and death, what's called yin. They haven't achieved ultimate freedom, or sire, from this cycle.
So even the gods aren't off the hook.
Nope. Their happiness is tied to their accumulated fruits of goodness, or inja, which eventually runs out. They still experience suffering, just maybe on a different level.
That's a pretty fascinating idea. So even with like a ton of good karma, there's still a limit. It kind of highlights this idea of impermanence that seems to run through all of Buddhist cosmology.
Absolutely. Nothing lasts forever, even for the gods. Which brings us back to the idea that the Buddha isn't some supreme being you worship, but more like a guide who shows you the path to ending suffering, a path that anyone can potentially follow.
And that brings us to like the heart of it all, this concept we mentioned earlier, dependent origination or yin. This is like the key to understanding how Buddhists see reality.
Yeah, it's super central. It's basically the principle that everything arises in dependence upon other things. Nothing exists in isolation. It's all interconnected.
And to illustrate this, there's this really cool analogy from the Samyutta Nikaya, which is a collection of the Buddha's teachings. It's the image of these two reeds standing upright by leaning against each other for support.
Oh, I've heard of that one. It's simple, but it really gets the point across.
Yeah, totally. The quote is, dependent on name and form arises consciousness. Dependent on consciousness arises name and form. If this exists, that comes to be. If this ceases, that ceases to be.
All right, unpack that for us. What does that actually mean?
So basically, name and form, or yeah, refers to our entire psychophysical existence, like our bodies, our senses, our thoughts, feelings, everything that makes us who we are. And consciousness, or is our awareness, our subjective experience.
So the Re's, they represent these two things, our inner world of consciousness and our outer physical reality. And they're both dependent on each other, right? They can't exist without the other.
Yeah, it's like they're constantly supporting each other or rising together. Like our awareness shapes how we see the world, and the world around us shapes our awareness. It's this dynamic relationship, not a one-way street.
It makes you realize how little actually exists in isolation, doesn't it? We're always influencing and being influenced by everything around us.
Totally. And this principle of interconnectedness is not just some abstract idea. It has real practical implications.
Huh?
Our sources tell the story about Shariputra, one of the Buddha's main disciples. He was initially drawn to Buddhism after hearing just one verse from Ashvajit, another one of the Buddha's early followers.
Oh, interesting. What was the verse?
The verse was, all phenomena arise from causes and conditions. All phenomena cease from causes and conditions. In Chinese, it's Turkey.
Wow, that's pretty profound. That one line basically sums up the whole principle of dependent origination.
Yeah, just hearing that sparked a huge shift in Shariputra's understanding. It really shows the power of this insight.
It does. And to really dive into this whole idea of interconnectedness, the Buddhist teachings lay out these 12 links of existence, also called the 12 nadanas, or 12 dependent arisings.
Okay, so what are these 12 links all about?
Basically, they describe this cycle of birth and death and the suffering that's part of it. It's a way of seeing how this cycle perpetuates itself.
So it's like a map of the whole process from beginning to end.
Yeah, exactly. And it starts with ignorance, or this isn't just about not knowing stuff. It's about having this fundamental misunderstanding of how reality works.
Like clinging to the idea of a separate self or thinking that things are permanent when they're not.
Exactly. And this ignorance leads to actions, or these are our intentional activities, the things we do, say, and think. All of that creates karma.
So it's like planting a seed, right? The actions we take, whether good or bad, they create these potential consequences that will eventually ripen.
Right. And those actions then condition consciousness, which takes shape as name and form, our physical and mental makeup. This includes the development of our six senses: sight, hearing, smell, taste, touch, and the mind itself.
So now we have a body, we have senses, we're interacting with the world. What happens next?
Well, with our six senses, we have contact with the external world. And this contact leads to feeling, the experience of pleasure, pain, or neutral sensations.
So we're starting to feel things, to have these emotional responses to our experiences.
Right. And those feelings give rise to craving. Really, this is our desire for things, our attachment to pleasant experiences, and our aversion to unpleasant ones.
And craving leads to grasping, right? Like clinging to the things we like and trying to push away the things we don't like.
Exactly. And this grasping fuels becoming, which is the karmic process that sets up our future rebirths.
So we're creating the conditions for our next life based on our actions and attachments in this life.
Precisely. And then, of course, this leads to birth itself, dormancy, and ultimately aging and death. Yeah. So you can see how it's this cyclical process, each link feeding into the next.
It's like a chain reaction and it just keeps going.
Yeah. And the key insight here is that by addressing the root, that ignorance at the beginning, we can break the whole chain.
It's not just about knowing the links, it's about seeing where we can actually intervene, where we can make a change.
And that's where the reverse order, the POO, comes in. This is the path to liberation, to ending the cycle.
So how does that work? How do we reverse the process?
It starts with ending ignorance. When we truly understand the nature of reality, impermanence, interconnectedness, then there's no basis for those diluted actions anymore.
So by seeing things clearly, we stop creating the karma that keeps the cycle going.
Exactly. And without that ignorance, conditioned consciousness ceases and so on, all the way back to the end of aging and death.
So it's not just about understanding the problem intellectually, it's about seeing the way out, seeing how to actually break free.
Yeah, it's about putting that understanding into practice, changing the way we live.
And it's interesting how these 12 links connect with another key teaching in Buddhism, the four clear truths, jhana.
Absolutely. The 12 links basically provide a detailed explanation of the first two truths.
Right. The first truth, the truth of suffering, or ye, is all about acknowledging that life, as we usually experience it, is full of difficulties and dissatisfaction.
And the second truth, the truth of the origin of suffering, or A, tells us that the root cause of this suffering lies in our afflictions, things like greed, hatred, and delusion.
And also the karma force of our actions. Maybe.
Right.
And we've seen how those arise from ignorance and other conditions.
Right. So the 12 links map out the origin of suffering in a really detailed way. They show us exactly how it all works.
And then the third truth, the truth of the cessation of suffering, or way, is nirvana, su, the state of complete liberation, the end of suffering.
And the fourth truth, the truth of the path to the cessation of suffering, or awe, is the eightfold path, and all the practices that aim to eliminate those causes of suffering.
So dependent origination, it's not just some abstract idea, it's the framework for understanding why we suffer and how to become free from it.
Exactly. It describes how everything is impermanent, interconnected, constantly changing. It's this blending of causes, this arising and falling by conditions.
And it's all governed by cause and effect, by karma.
Right. And importantly, denies the existence of a permanent, independent self or a creator God. Everything is contingent. Everything's connected. Everything's in constant flux.
So wrapping up this deep dive, it's clear that Buddhism does have these religious elements, the temples, the rituals, the beliefs. But at its heart, it's about understanding this profound concept of dependent origination and putting that understanding into practice.
Yeah, it's about developing wisdom, bliss, cultivating clear awareness, and living your life in a way that reflects this deep interconnectedness.
It's less about worshiping a deity and more about this path of self-discovery and liberation.
Yeah, and maybe the best way to understand Buddhism is not as just a religion, but as this path, this way of life that leads to realizing the truth and cultivating compassion.
And that path starts with really grasping the meaning of dependent origination.
It's the foundation, the starting point for everything.
So here's a final thought for you to ponder. Knowing that everything's interconnected, that every action has an effect, how does that change the way you see your own actions, even the small ones? How does it affect your relationship with the world around you?
What does it mean for how you live your life if there isn't this separate, independent self calling the shots?
It's a huge question. It makes you rethink everything, doesn't it? Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. It's been a really thought-provoking one.
Definitely. I think we've all got a lot to chew on now.
Absolutely.
Thanks a
Until
lot.
next time.
See you then.